members of this committee have accused me of providing false information when I responded to questions about the IRS processing of applications for tax exemption. I have not done anything wrong. And while I would very much like to answer the committee's questions today, I've been advised by my counsel to assert my constitutional right not to testify or answer questions related to the subject matter of this hearing.
That was, of course, Lois Lerner from the IRS taking the Fifth Amendment when testifying before Congress. This has a lot of tentacles. This is obviously spreading. The story is spreading. We've been following this story for a number of weeks right now. There's a fabulous op-ed in today's Journal, and I've asked the author of that, Kimberly Strassel, to join us. She's a columnist for the Wall Street Journal's Potomac Watch, and she's with us by phone. Kimberly, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Kimberly, as I said, it's a fabulous op-ed, and it seems in the past that this whole issue, is there a link between the shenanigans at the IRS and the White House? What have you uncovered so far?
Well, here's what we found out this week. There were emails released from the House Ways and Means Committee that now show that FEC investigators, those are attorneys from the Federal Election Commission, were in touch with Lois Lerner, asking her information also about conservative organizations operating in elections. Now, why does this matter? On the first place, it turns out that these FEC attorneys were conducting this investigation without the express approval of the commissioners at the FEC. That's one thing. Secondly, we know the IRS is not supposed to turn over confidential tax information to anyone, including the FEC. We don't know yet what the IRS did turn over to the FEC, but already there are some red flags here. Where it gets more interesting is that the group that the FEC was asking about was a conservative organization called American Issues Project. This happened to be a group that the complaint against which to the FEC was filed by the Obama campaign back in 2008. And that does put a more interesting twist on it, because what you end up having here is a complaint filed by the Obama campaign. The FEC took an active interest in it, was asking Lois Lerner, who we now know is at the center of this IRS scandal, about this organization too.
Kimberly, from what you're telling me, if the Obama campaign actually asked the IRS to go after, I guess it's the AIP is how it is, you refer to it in the article, that's a smoking gun, isn't it?
Well, what we know is that they filed a complaint to the FEC about this group. And you have to put this in context. Remember, step back. Back in 2008, Democrats and the president's campaign at the time were very concerned about the number of new conservative organizations that were getting into politics, very concerned that they would be outspent in the money game. And one of their tactics for trying to combat this was, and they were very open about this at the time, was that they were going to try to intimidate donors out of giving money to these groups. And so what they did, and this was an example of it, the Obama campaign, AIP ran some ads against the Obama team. They didn't like it, so the Obama general counsel for his campaign ended up calling on the Department of Justice to prosecute this group. They filed a complaint against this group with the Federal Election Commission. They demanded to see documents that this group had filed with the IRS. And it was sort of a harassment campaign. So what we now know is, this was a complaint filed with the FEC, which is legitimate. Anyone can do that. But what we have found out this week is that in pursuing this complaint, FEC staff were conducting an investigation without the approval of the commission. They ended up talking to Lois Lerner again over at the IRS. And we've also since found out, because of a different document that came out this week from the FEC, that the staff was very intent on trying to nail this group. They spent 5 years working on this case. It only just closed last week. And when it did close, one of the Republican commissioners went out of his way in his statement on the closing of the case to detail the extraordinary actions the staff had taken in order to try to get this particular group that had been complained about by the Obama campaign.
Kimberly, there are two issues I want to talk about. First, President Obama is kind of out on a campaign trail, and the memo that went out to literally everybody from the administration that's been talking in front of the press is phony scandal, everything's a phony scandal. Isn't it odd for a campaign to actually go after an organization like this? That seems odd to me, just as a layman.
Well, again, I think this was certainly a new turn in the way politics was being conducted. It's a tactic that was being pioneered, as it were, in 2008 by Democrats and in particular by the Obama campaign, where they were actually attempting to use government agencies to try to intimidate some of these groups. Now, and that continued, by the way. If you go and look at 2010, the 2010 election, the president was out there nearly every day on a speech complaining about these conservative organizations that were operating in elections and suggesting that they might even be doing illegal things. So this was definitely out. He was sending a message every day that, people in government ought to be taking a look at these groups. And we now, and on the other hand, also filing complaints and attempting to inspire and get federal bureaucrats to get involved in going after some of these groups. So what we have here is pretty solid evidence now that, in fact, the Federal Election Commission staff seemed to take this very seriously and was involved for close to 5 years in trying to get one of these organizations that the administration filed a complaint about.
Kim, let me take the other side of this for a second. We only have a short time, but is there any evidence that the Republican Party or the Republican campaign, in particular Mitt Romney's campaign, did anything similar?
Well, it has always been, and we should be clear about this, that it has always been the case that campaigns and political operatives, they do file complaints against each other with the Federal Election Commission. But I do think it's fair to say what happened here is the Republicans really flooded into a lot of these areas in recent election cycles, into 501c4s, social welfare organizations, a lot of these things you've been reading about in the context of the IRS investigation. And this unnerved Democrats, and they did take this to a new level in terms of their public complaints. Remember, we also had Democratic congressmen and senators complaining to the IRS, saying they ought to get tougher on these groups. Now that we find out the IRS was targeting them and that FEC staff was looking at them, they like to suggest that they had nothing to do with this. But, orders sort of go out from the top. I mean, whether or not they're direct, whether or not it's a telephone call, or whether or not you're just simply using a megaphone every day to suggest there's a problem with these groups, somebody was listening, and clearly action was taken.
It seems like one of the myths that's being dispelled right here is that this is not just some rogue agent somewhere off in Cincinnati, doing this on their own. There's one last thing I wanted to touch on that you put in your article. Democrats are increasingly getting worried. Will any abandon ship and just kind of like not, want to step away from the president here, or at least not be seen?
Well, I think that's going to depend deeply on what comes out of some of this investigations. We got word, for instance, today that Max Baucus and Orrin Hatch, who are working in the Senate on investigation, they said that they're continuing that. They're not releasing any results until they get some more answers. You had the House Oversight Committee come out and today sent a subpoena to the Treasury Department demanding documents that the IRS has so far been refusing to hand over. So we've got a long way to go yet in this investigation, and that's going to say a lot about how Democrats handle it depending on the revelations that come.
Okay, Kim, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your expertise.